If you judge these lenses only by appearance, you might never mount them on a camera. One looks like a green cannon. One looks like a giant glass eye. One looks like a scientific probe. And one is so huge it makes the camera look like an accessory. But behind those ugly bodies are lenses capable of stunning wildlife, macro, portraits, cinema, and night sky images. If you are passionate about unusual lenses, rare optics, and fascinating camera gear stories, make sure you are subscribed to Alt Buzz Lenses, because we have got much stranger glass coming up. Let's count them down. At number 10, we have the Sony FE PZ 28 to 135mm f4 G OSS. Pull this lens out of a bag, and people will assume you work in broadcast. It has the long, tube-like body of a cinema lens, a power zoom ring that whirs quietly when you touch it, and a profile that makes most Sony mirrorless bodies look like they are carrying something they were never designed for. On an A7 body, the proportions are genuinely strange, front-heavy, industrial, and completely at odds with the elegant minimalism Sony usually brings to its full-frame system. But that industrial look is not a design failure. It is a design decision. The PZ in the name stands for power zoom, and that single feature explains almost everything about how this lens looks and why it matters. A motorized zoom ring that moves smoothly, silently, and at a consistent pace is not something still photographers generally need. But for video shooters, especially solo operators, documentary filmmakers, and event videographers, it changes what is possible on camera. No lurching, no breathing, no handshake from manual adjustments mid-shot. Just clean, controlled movement. The constant f4 aperture across the entire zoom range means exposure does not shift as you push from 28 to 135 millimeter. The OSS stabilization helps when you are shooting handheld. And the G designation tells you this was built to Sony's professional optical standards, not as a budget compromise. It looks like it escaped from a camcorder, because in the best possible way, a little bit of it did. At number 9, we have the Canon RF 800mm F11 IS STM. This lens is long, not in the thundering way of a professional super telephoto, more like a strange telescoping tube that you extend before shooting and retract when you are done. When collapsed, it looks unfinished. When extended, it looks like a piece of optical plumbing more than a camera lens. There is nothing about the proportions that feels balanced. Put it on an RP body and the combination looks like a toy. Put it on an R5 and it still looks slightly wrong. What Canon was solving here was accessibility. A traditional 800mm prime from any major manufacturer is a professional tool with a professional price, heavy, large, and built for working photographers who justify the investment through daily use. The RF 800 does not try to compete with those lenses. Instead, it offers a fixed f11 aperture, which is dim enough that fast action in low light becomes genuinely difficult. Canon is honest about that, and serious wildlife photographers know the limitation. But at 800mm on a full-frame sensor, you are reaching distant birds, compressed lunar detail, and wildlife subjects that would be invisible to a standard telephoto. For birders who shoot in good light, for hobbyists who want reach without a second mortgage, and for Canon RF shooters who just want to know what 800mm feels like, this strange telescoping tube delivers something real. It may look like a science fair project, but the images it creates at that focal length are not a joke. At number 8, we have the Canon MP-E 65mm f2.8 1:5 macro. At minimum magnification, this lens looks unusual but manageable. At maximum extension, it transforms into something that belongs on a laboratory bench. The barrel stretches out, the working distance shrinks to almost nothing, and the whole assembly starts to look more like a mechanical instrument than a photographic one. The front element peers at its subject from uncomfortably close range. There are no focus rings in the conventional sense. You focus this lens by moving the entire camera forward and backward in physical space. The reason it looks like that is because it does something no normal macro lens does. Standard macro lenses reach 1:1 magnification, meaning the subject appears on the sensor at life size. The MP-E 65 starts there. It then continues to 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and finally 5 times magnification. At 5 times life size on a full-frame sensor, a single grain of sand fills a significant portion of the frame. The eye of an insect becomes a landscape. A water droplet becomes a world. This is a lens built for entomologists, scientific photographers, texture artists, and anyone willing to work in the extremely demanding conditions that come with 5 times macro. Depth of field at that magnification is measured in fractions of a millimeter. Vibration from a passing truck can ruin a shot. The technique required is real, but the images that come from it, the kind that stop people mid-scroll and make them question whether they are looking at a photograph or a painting, those images simply cannot be made any other way. It looks like a scientific tool because, in many ways, that is exactly what it is. At number 7, we have the Laowa 24mm f 14.2 times macro probe. There is no polite way to describe this lens. It is a long, narrow tube, roughly the diameter of a finger, attached to a camera body at one end and pointed at its subject at the other. It looks like a medical endoscope that somehow ended up in a photography store. When you see it on a camera for the first time, the instinct is to ask what procedure it is used for. The answer is wide-angle macro, and that combination sounds simple until you understand why it is so difficult to achieve. A normal macro lens sits a reasonable distance from the subject and uses a long focal length to fill the frame. That approach works for static subjects, but creates a specific perspective: compressed, flat, background separated. The Laowa probe works completely differently. Its 24mm focal length means extreme wide-angle perspective. Its tube design means you can position the front element millimeters from a subject, inside a flower, alongside an insect, moving through a miniature set, pushing through a plate of food at table level. The shots this lens creates look like nothing else in photography. Wide-angle macro gives subjects enormous presence and scale against a recognizable environment behind them. A beetle photographed this way does not look like a specimen. It looks monumental. For food videographers, product shooters, documentary filmmakers, and anyone building miniature worlds, the probe creates perspectives that no conventional optic can approach. It looks ridiculous until you see what it does, and once you see what it does, you stop noticing how it looks entirely. We have the Sigma 14mm f1.8 DG HSM Art. Most prime lenses achieve a certain visual balance. A 50mm lens looks like a lens. An 85mm portrait prime looks like a lens. The Sigma 14mm f1.8 does not look like a lens. It looks like someone attached a glass hemisphere to a camera body and called it a day. The front element is enormous and heavily rounded, giving the lens a bulbous, front-heavy profile that photographs never quite prepare you for in person. It is large, it is heavy, and it has no pretense of being anything other than what it is. What it is happens to be the widest f1.8 prime lens available for full-frame cameras, and that distinction matters enormously to a specific kind of photographer. Astrophotographers shooting the Milky Way need focal lengths wide enough to capture large sections of sky without tracking equipment, and apertures wide enough to gather meaningful light in short exposures without turning stars into trails. The combination of 14mm and f1.8 gives night sky shooters a tool that makes genuinely dark skies look alive with stars, in exposures of just a few seconds. Beyond astrophotography, the lens earns respect from landscape photographers chasing dramatic perspectives, architectural shooters working in tight environments, and anyone who needs ultra-wide coverage with real low-light ability. The Art Series designation is not decorative. Sigma built this lens with edge-to-edge sharpness as a genuine priority, not an afterthought. It looks like a glass cannon aimed at the sky. For night sky photographers, that cannon actually fires. If you enjoy lens stories that go beyond normal reviews and explore the strange, rare, beautiful, and ridiculous side of camera gear, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. This channel is about the lenses photographers still talk about, even when they look completely wrong. At number 5, we have the Nikon AF-S 14-24mm f2.8 GED. The protruding front element is the first thing anyone notices. It pushes forward from the barrel in a rounded bulge that makes filter use nearly impossible without an expensive specialist adapter. The fixed petal hood is built directly into the design, which means the lens can never achieve the clean cylindrical profile of a normal zoom. The whole thing looks front-loaded and slightly precarious, as if the optical formula is straining against the housing trying to contain it. It looks that way because it is. An ultra-wide zoom at f2.8 on a full-frame sensor is optically demanding in a way that pushes lens designers toward shapes they would not otherwise choose. The bulging front element is part of how Nikon achieved the angle of view, the aperture, and the correction quality simultaneously. Compressing that into a slim, elegant profile was not an option. The design is what the optics required. When this lens launched, it changed how professional photographers thought about wide-angle zooms. Landscape photographers found that its corner performance at 14mm was competitive with dedicated prime lenses. Event and wedding photographers discovered an ultra-wide option that did not fall apart at wide apertures. Photojournalists working indoors with available light had a zoom that could actually gather enough of it. The front element still looks strange. The proportions still feel wrong. But the Nikon 14-24 proved that ugly engineering could deliver completely serious professional results, and the photography world agreed. At number 4, we have the Canon EF 11-24mm F4L USM. There are zoom lenses with large front elements. And then there is this. The Canon 11-24's front element is so large and so dramatically curved that it looks less like a piece of photographic glass and more like a glass dome meant for a different kind of instrument entirely. The L-series red ring sits near the base of a barrel that widens significantly toward the front, giving the lens a profile that is wide, imposing, and almost aggressively large. Nobody looks at this lens and mistakes it for something modest. The reason is the focal length. 11mm rectilinear on a full-frame sensor is one of the most demanding optical specifications that exists in zoom design. Rectilinear means straight lines remain straight, no fisheye barrel distortion bending the frame into a curved panorama. Achieving that at 11mm requires a front element with extreme curvature and precise optical correction across an enormous angle of view. There is no small way to build that. The size is not excess. The size is the requirement. What photographers get in return is a perspective that no other Canon zoom can touch. Architecture shot from a tight interior corner. Landscapes that include horizon-to-horizon sky and detailed foreground simultaneously. Creative compositions with dramatic forced perspective that a 24 or even 16mm lens simply cannot replicate. The Canon 11-24 is not subtle, but the images it creates are not subtle either. And that, for the photographers who carry it, is entirely the point. At number 3, we have the Nikon Z 58mm f 0.95 S Noct. A 58mm prime should look like a prime lens, compact, balanced. The kind of lens that disappears in front of a camera body and lets the body do the visual talking. The Nikon Z Noct does not look like any of those things. It is massive. The barrel is wide enough that the lens diameter rivals the camera body behind it. It is manual focus only, which for a lens of this size and price feels like a deliberate statement of intent rather than a specification. Compromise. On a Z body, the proportions look almost comical, a camera wearing a lens twice its own weight. F 0.95 is the number that explains all of it. That aperture gathers roughly twice as much light as f1.4, and the optical precision required to make that aperture usable, rather than just theoretically open, is extraordinary. Most lenses at very wide apertures produce images that look soft, dreamy, and aberration-heavy wide open. The Noct was designed to be optically excellent at f0.95, not merely functional. That standard requires glass elements of exceptional size, precise internal construction, and manufacturing tolerances that push the limits of what lens making at scale can achieve. The result is bokeh at a depth that photographers still struggle to fully describe in practical terms. Subject separation that makes portraits feel three-dimensional in a way few lenses approach. and a low-light capability that changes what is photographically possible without artificial light. The Noct is ugly because it refuses every compromise that would make it smaller, lighter, or easier to manufacture. And that uncompromising quality is precisely what made it one of the most discussed lenses of its generation. At number 2, we have the Nikon Fisheye-Nikkor 6mm f2.8. There are fisheye lenses. And then there is this. The front element of the 6mm is a large, perfect hemisphere of glass that protrudes from the lens barrel, like an enormous eye looking at everything at once. The proportions are so extreme that the lens cannot be used with a standard camera strap. The front element physically prevents the camera from resting against anything. Carrying it requires care. Storing it requires a dedicated case. And looking at it for the first time requires a moment to process that this is, in fact, a camera lens. Nikon built this lens during the era when fisheye photography was being explored not just creatively but scientifically. The 6mm covers a 220-degree field of view, which means it sees behind itself. A full circle of image projected onto the film plane, horizon to horizon and then some. Architecture, sky, ground, and whatever is beside and slightly behind the photographer, all captured in a single exposure. The applications included scientific imaging, all-sky astronomical photography, surveillance systems, and specialized creative work that pushed film-era photography into genuinely unusual territory. It is a lens that most photographers will never own, rarely touch, and never use for a conventional assignment. It is also one of the most visually memorable objects in the history of camera optics, recognized instantly by anyone who has encountered it even once. It is ugly in the most legendary way possible. It looks like an eye that can see behind itself, and in a very literal sense, it can. At number 1, we have the Sigma 2 100-500mm f2.8 APO EX DG. Everything about this lens is extreme. The weight approaches 15 kilograms. The length, when fully extended to 500mm, makes most professional super telephoto primes look restrained by comparison. It has a built-in tripod handle, not a collar, a handle, because the lens needs to be carried and operated as its own primary unit, with the camera body acting almost as an accessory. And then there is the color. The Sigma 200-500 is painted in a distinctive, unmistakable shade of olive green, not the white of Canon's professional telephotos, not the gray of Nikon's long glass. Green, unusual, conspicuous, slightly military-looking green. The f2.8 aperture is what makes this lens genuinely remarkable rather than simply enormous. Every other lens that reaches 500mm with a serious optical design does so at f4, f5.6, or slower. Maintaining f2.8 across a zoom range that begins at 200mm and extends to 500 requires an amount of glass that turns the optical formula into an engineering project of extraordinary complexity. The weight is not waste. Every kilogram of it is doing optical work. Keeping that aperture open and corrected across that zoom range demands glass elements that are large, numerous, and precisely arranged. There is no lighter way to build this lens, because there is no simpler way to achieve what it does. Wildlife photographers who used it described shooting in low light at focal lengths that normally require extremely fast shutter speeds. And being able to do it, because f2.8 at 500mm is a combination that should not exist but does. Sports photographers at large outdoor venues found that it eliminated the choice between reach and aperture that defines long telephoto work. For the rare shooter who could justify it and transport it, it changed what super telephoto zoom photography was capable of. It is not just ugly. It is excessive, impractical for most photographers, and visually unforgettable to anyone who has ever been in the same room with it. It belongs at number 1, not just because of what it looks like, but because it represents the furthest possible distance between conventional lens, aesthetics, and optical ambition. Nobody made a lens like this before it. Nobody has made a lens quite like it since. Some lenses look elegant because they are simple. Some lenses look ugly because they are extreme, too wide, too long, too fast, too specialized, or too ambitious to fit inside anything that looks balanced or refined. They carry more glass than beauty allows. They stretch further than proportion permits. They prioritize the image so completely that appearance stops being a consideration at all. In photography, results matter more than appearance. The images a lens creates outlast the first impression of how the lens looks. And the strange lenses on this list, the ones that look like tubes, probes, cannons, and glass eyes, created images that photographers still remember. A beautiful lens is nice to look at, but a strange lens that creates images no normal lens can make. That is the kind of ugly photographers remember. If you enjoy strange lenses, legendary glass, and gear stories that go beyond the usual spec sheet, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. We will see you in the next one.